In this video, we're going to look at asset ratio analysis. Imagine that a patient comes into a doctor's office. How does the doctor know if the patient is doing well? Well, he has to do some sort of diagnosis. There's some sort of baseline which is understood. But what if somebody comes in and talks about their business? How do we know if the business is doing well? Well, we take a look at ratio analysis, and this specific lesson will be about looking at asset ratios. So, before we begin, let's do a quick review. How is net sales calculated? And how would you determine the average assets? I encourage you to pause and think about these questions and try and answer them. The net sales is calculated as the sales revenue minus sales return minus sales discounts. And the average assets would be calculated as the starting assets plus the ending assets divided by 2. This is assuming that we're just doing a straight average and not a weighted average as to number of days an asset is in use. So we're just basically simplifying this quite a bit more. And there could be quite a bit more fluctuation in this if we're to have a smaller company, but we're assuming we're looking at larger companies and we're just doing a straight average. Question for thought. How are asset turnover and return on assets calculated, and what do they mean about a company? Now, why is analysis of these ratios dependent upon comparisons within the industry? So what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to actually take a look at some asset ratios. The asset turnover indicates how efficiently a company uses its assets. How many dollars of sales are generated by each dollar that is invested in assets. And it's calculated as the net sales divided by the average total assets. This also explains why I got you to tell me about net sales and average total assets in the first review slide. So the ratios vary among industries and should be used as a comparison. And this will become very apparent when we go through some of the examples. We're going to apply these asset ratios to real world examples. Can also be used as a trend analysis, comparing between previous years. Have they improved? So remember that analogy of the patient coming in and talking with the doctor? Well, when somebody comes in as a business, we want to see how did they improve from one year to the next, and how are they doing against the peers in that industry. So here's an analysis. These are coming back to results of 2011 and 2012. So a lot of the time back in the day, I used to invest in a lot of commodities. Commodity being oil. Suncor, Cenovus are two oil companies, very large in Canada. Apple and BlackBerry at the time, very big in similar industries. So here's what the records were. And I believe these are in thousands of dollars. Could be millions, don't know. I'd have to double check that. Suncor had assets in 2011 at $74,777 and assets of $76,449. Their net sales were $38,616. At this point, I'd encourage you to pause the video and try and calculate 1. The average assets, and 2. The asset turnover rates. This should take you a few minutes. So we're going to apply this asset turnover ratio here. So we're going to take our net sales. What are our net sales? Well, for the first one, net sales would just be this total here, $38,616. So we're already provided with this number. What about the average total assets? Well, in this case, we're going to be taking these two numbers here, adding them together and dividing by 2. And then we're going to be taking, over here, we're going to take the net sales, which is $38,616, and we're going to divide it by the average assets, which is $75,613. That's the average of these two. What we start to see is we get asset turnover ratios on the right-hand side. So what exactly does this tell us? Well, if we were to compare Suncor and Cenovus, it's saying that, well, Cenovus is getting about 74 cents for every investment in an asset, whereas Suncor is getting about 51 cents return from their assets. So when we compare the two, it's saying that Cenovus is much more efficiently using its assets. Now, we can't take if we were to try and compare these to an industry, for example, the industry of smartphones, it's like comparing apples and oranges. They've got different assets, and therefore their asset turnover ratios will be very different, and that's definitely represented here. Apple ends up having an asset ratio turnover of 1.07. It wouldn't be very good to compare these two. They're different assets with different focuses. BlackBerry, on the other hand, it is in the same industry, and so it can be useful to compare. This says 0.84. So what it does show you is that Apple has a much more efficient use of its assets versus BlackBerry. So comparing the two, Suncor and Synovus, it appears that Synovus uses its assets more efficiently. And comparing Apple and BlackBerry, Apple uses its assets much more efficiently. Let's take a look at return on assets. It measures the overall profitability, the percentage of earnings generated by average total assets. So the return on assets would be the net income divided by the average total assets. So this analysis is based on comparisons of similar companies and trend analysis. Let's see how that actually works out. So we're going to be using similar companies in the next example. Suncor and Synovus, Apple and BlackBerry again. Here's their net income. Again, I'd encourage you to pause and try and apply this formula to see what happens and what the return on assets is. In this case, we're going to be taking our net income, the 2,783, and dividing it by the average assets, which we calculated in the previous slide. We used the starting and ending asset values, and we took them, added them together, and divided by 2 to get these numbers. So you do need to take multiple year inventory values to end up finding, asset values to find out what these numbers are. So in this case, if we're calculating the return on assets, it's going to be 2,783 divided by 75,113. We can do this for each one of these. So it says that on average, we're getting about 3.68% return from each asset if we're in Suncor, 4.28% return on assets if we're in Synovus. Wow, and look at that, Apple's at 28.54%. So this really is emphasizing that we should only be comparing companies within the same industry. Now, BlackBerry was starting to have a decline at this point, and so they have a negative balance or a negative return on assets. So they're not doing so hot. That also indicates that they may have to scale back instead of, well, at this point they're not growing. They're probably trying to decrease or restructure. So comparing Suncor and Synovus, it's clear that Synovus is able to generate more income for each dollar of assets, also represented through the efficiency in the previous set of slides. Comparing Apple and BlackBerry, BlackBerry has incurred a loss and Apple is far above all companies here. So just to give you another idea, this here was taken from online, and it compares a whole bunch of companies in the same industry. APPL, Apple, there's the industry average, Dell, EMC, and Lenovo. So if we're looking at Apple, the return on assets is 20.8%, the industry average is 15.49%, Dell is 2.98, much lower, EMC 7.19, which is pretty good, and we've got 3.89 for Lenovo. Profitability, it also calculates a whole bunch of other averages. For example, the gross profit margins, operating margins. So it can tell you a little bit about the efficiency of a company as well. So here's a pure comparison for Suncor. Here, this is another pure analysis. So we're comparing Suncor, which is a very large oil company, to Husky. In this case, the return on assets is 3.6, return on equity is 6.97. Here's the industry averages here. Wow, look at that. The return on investment is actually negative in terms of the industry average, yet these companies are still doing quite well. Gross profit margins are high, and what you do start to see here, it becomes very clear on why comparisons of these ratios must be made within companies in the same industry. The phone industry has a 15% return on assets, while oil has 1.97% return. Also, we start to see that there are very big differences in gross margin. Let's pop back a slide. gross profit margins. It's interesting because even though there are different ratios for the assets, we do start to see gross profit margins and operating margins are very different for Apple versus oil. So at the end of the day, the bottom line is this. The asset turnover ratio helps investors understand how efficiently companies are using their assets to generate sales. Investors use the ratio to compare similar companies in the same sector or group to determine who's getting the most out of their assets and to help identify weaknesses. So from year to year, it could say, hey, we're not using our assets as much as we could. Maybe we could use them more efficiently. And it will help them make decisions as to whether or not they should get more assets or try and utilize different assets. The asset turnover ratio is calculated by dividing net sales or revenue by the average total assets. This is a quick little lesson on ratios. What we do have here, some activities to try and practice your analysis skills. I've still yet to decide what I'm doing with your summative. I do think I have an idea which will simplify things and make it super easy for you guys, but still at the same time going through analysis. Hope you've enjoyed the lesson. Enjoy for now. If you have any questions, reach out to me by email or drop a question onto the Google Classroom. Bye for now.